Would you repeat these words after me? We are troubled on every side, but not distressed. In the 4th chapter of Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth, Paul teaches us 3 things about trouble that I want to examine with you very quickly during the time that is ours to share in this service. First, Paul answers Joseph Scriven's question and says in a letter what the Africans who lived through chattel slavery sang about life. Scriven asks, is there trouble anywhere? Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? Paul writes, yes, there is trouble. We are troubled on every side. There is trouble everywhere. The Africans in bondage in this land of the free and home of the brave. The Africans said there is trouble. Scriven asked, is there trouble anywhere? And the Africans sang, there is trouble all over this world. There's trouble everywhere. When Paul wrote, there was geopolitical trouble. There were wars that Romans were fighting outside of Rome. In fact, the Roman army had troops stationed in Palestine. Italian troops billeted on African soil. Trouble. There were Roman troops in a barracks in Jerusalem. That's trouble. There were Palestinian insurgents trying to get Rome out of their country. Trouble. There were Egyptian radicals who had the crazy idea that Egypt should be run by Egyptians and that Egypt should be policed by Egyptians. They wanted the Roman troops, the Roman military, the Roman government, the Italians out of Egypt. And they fought to get them out of North Africa. Trouble. In Acts, the 21st chapter, when Paul was being beaten by a crowd of folks stirred up by a lie, why is it that we will still believe a lie before we will listen to the truth? They lied on Paul. Church folk lied on Paul. Trouble. And a crowd of folks started whipping up on Paul based on a lie told on Paul by some church folk. And while Paul was being beat up, somebody ran and got the police. The popo came to see about Paul. Trouble. And when they could not make heads or tails of what the confusion was all about, and once a lie gets loose in a crowd, it's hard to cut through the confusion to get at the truth. When the Roman popo could not make any sense out of the confusion, the Roman officer in charge of the Roman troops stationed in Jerusalem, you just missed what I said. Does anybody here besides me ever read these scriptures and see the parallels between their time and our time? We've got American troops from Mississippi and the south side of Chicago stationed right now, today, as we worship, in Fallujah and Baghdad in Iraq in 2006. And the Romans in Acts 21 had Italian boys from Sicily and Verona stationed in Jerusalem and Capernaum in Israel. The Roman troops in Acts 21 could not make any sense of the confusion that day in Jerusalem, that they saw Paul getting whipped, and they heard a bunch of loud accusations. First one thing said, one was said over here, another person over here was saying another thing. So to try to calm down the crowd and cut through the confusion, the Roman officer, the commanding officer, in charge of the troops, he ordered that Paul be taken inside the Roman barracks. I'm loving this. Roman barracks. Roman barracks in Jerusalem, Jericho, and Judah. Like American barracks in Fallujah, Al-Qatar, and Seoul, Korea. As they were taking Paul into the barracks, Paul turned to the commanding officer and spoke to him in Greek. He said, may I say something to you? In Greek. Now that blew the Italian boy's mind. When this darky spoke up in Greek, I'm not making this up. Read it for yourself. Acts 21 verses 37 and 38. When Paul spoke in Greek, the Italian said to him, do you know Greek? Then You are not the Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led 4,000 assassins out in the wilderness. Number one, the Egyptians were African. Egypt do be in Africa. Joe, where's Joanne? Egypt is in Africa. Number two, the Italian thought Paul was an Egyptian. Why? Well, what had happened was he was the same brown color as the Egyptian, and all them natives looked alike to the Italians. But then number three, the Egyptians wanted the Italians out of their country, so they fought trouble. 4,000 insurgents against an occupying Italian army. Trouble. When Paul wrote, there was trouble. There was geopolitical trouble. There was trouble among his own people. And you ain't gonna believe this, but there was even trouble in the church. There was not only trouble in Judaism with disagreements and debates among and between the Essenes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. There was also trouble in the Christian church. I know you ain't gonna believe this either, but right there in Corinth, this letter's in Corinth, there were church members in Corinth, where he's writing, who lined up behind certain preachers and called themselves gospel groupies, Apollos' apostles, Paul's posse. Some folk who like the way Cephas said it, or Cephas also known as Peter. They like the way Peter preached. Other folk who call themselves Chloe's people, members of a congregation in Corinth with a female pastor. Some other Corinthian Christians who wouldn't be caught dead in the church with no woman preacher. Trouble, trouble, trouble. Others still, maybe not in Corinth, but you get the picture, who lined up behind Freddie Haynes, as opposed to Rudolph McKissick, as opposed to Marcus Cosby, as opposed to Claudette Copeland. Church members fixated on Jeremiah as opposed to Otis, and missing the one both Jeremiah and Otis are pointing people to. There was trouble in the church when Paul wrote. Trouble in Corinth and trouble in Galatia. Paul got so mad at the people in Galatia and the preachers who were teaching false doctrine in Galatia that Paul said he wished that the penis pushers, those were the ones who were sticklers for how much foreskin you could have on your penis and still be considered a Christian. Read it. I'm not making it. It's in the Bible. The Bible. Paul said he wished they would go on and cut their whole penis off. There was trouble in the church when Paul wrote. Trouble on the political front, trouble on the community front. The bras in the hood, them's the one Jesus was talking about who hung out on the Jericho Road. They would jack your stuff and jack you up in the process. There was trouble on the political front. Paul's people were under oppression. There was trouble on the community front, and there was trouble on the religious front. Paul wrote, we are troubled on every side. And when the Africans sang, things had not gotten any better. If anything, things had only gotten worse, really gotten worse. In Paul's day, when Paul wrote, there was no chattel slavery. But when the Africans sang, they were not even considered people. The Constitution of the United States defined them as property. When the Africans sang, European slave traders from Portugal and Spain, England and France, the Dutch countries and Netherlands and Germany, Europeans had swept into Africa and carried people from Accra to Angola, from Liberia to Luanda, carried men, women, boys, girls, toddlers and infants, still nursing, into lifelong slavery with no hope for freedom. The African slaves knew nothing but trouble. From the plantations in Jamaica and the plantations in Georgia, from the whippings and the beatings, the rapes and the brandings in Tennessee and Trinidad, from St. Thomas to St. Louis, from Aruba to Atlanta, from Nassau to Nashville, from Haiti to Hattiesburg, from the West Indies to Washington, Africans lived with a terrorism unlike any terror any white man had ever seen.